Hey there. Ready for something a little different?
Always up for a challenge.
Good, good. Because we're diving deep, deep into a world that's both familiar and completely hidden. I'm talking about the Mafia.
Yeah, but we're going way beyond those gangster movie cliches. This is about understanding the real deal.
Exactly. We're going beyond the headlines, beyond those famous names and infamous crimes.
Right. We're digging into the core of what makes the mafia tick, their beliefs, their systems, their lasting power.
It's fascinating stuff. And to guide us through this deep dive, we've got a paper called L'Arbre du Mal,
Which, for those who don't speak French, means
The Tree of Evil.
pretty intense title, right?
It is. And what's even more interesting, it was published back in 2011 by the same anonymous authors who wrote The Ghost.
Ah, The Ghost. Now, that was a real eye-opener, really exposed some of the hidden workings of the mafia.
So you can imagine this paper, The Tree of Evil, it's not pulling any punches. It dives into some really dark corners of the mafia world.
And it raises some seriously thought-provoking questions about the mafia's true nature and how they maintain their grip on power.
So our mission today is to unpack all of that, to explore the lesser-known aspects of the mafia, their beliefs, their methods, their enduring influence. And, the source material starts with this really intriguing question:
Oh yeah, the one about.
how groups like the 'Ndrangheta, based in these rural villages, become some of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world.
Mind-boggling, isn't it? You think of these tiny villages in Calabria, seemingly isolated.
But they're actually pulling the strings of international drug trafficking and money laundering operations.
It's a real paradox. How do they do it? Well, to even begin to answer that, we need to start with what we mean by mafia.
Right, because it's not as simple as it might seem. The source material actually gives us several different definitions.
Okay, so we've got the traditional view of the mafia, right?
Yeah.
A secret criminal society, very structured, with a strict hierarchy.
Like the Sicilian Cosa Nostra. The guys in pinstripe suits, lots of codes of silence, omerta, that whole image.
But then the source introduces this concept of a refined mafia, which operates much more subtly. It's less about brute force.
And more about influence, right?
Yeah.
It's the favors, the gifts, the social connections that create a web of obligation.
It's almost like they're weaving themselves into the fabric of society, becoming indistinguishable from legitimate institutions and businesses.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you think about it, because they're not always operating in the shadows.
Exactly. They're right there in plain sight, making it even harder to identify and combat them.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. The source argues that mafia can also describe a system driven by injustice, corruption, and a lack of rights.
So it's more of a societal phenomenon then, not just limited to specific criminal groups.
Right. It suggests that the mafia thrives in places where the rules are weak and people feel powerless.
I see. So it's like a toxic culture that can take root anywhere the conditions are right.
And, there's this really chilling anecdote in the source. The authors describe meeting a man in Apulia who talked about the mafia's desire to control youthful creativity.
Wow. That's disturbing. So it's not enough for them to control the present. They want to stifle the future as well.
It seems so. They want to crush any form of dissent, any independent thought, any spark of change.
So they can maintain their power indefinitely.
And here's where the source gets really controversial. It suggests that the mafia isn't just a criminal enterprise.
Oh, right. The whole mafia as a religion thing.
Exactly. That the mafia is actually a religion with its own rituals, beliefs, even traditions.
I can see how that might seem a little far-fetched at first.
Yeah, definitely a curveball.
Yeah.
But when you consider the fanatical devotion the mafia demands from its members, it kind of starts to make sense. It's not just about breaking the law. It's about adhering to a twisted belief system.
I mean, the source talks about the importance of blood in their rituals, their obsession with family ties.
And their fascination with the death.
Right, like they've created their own twisted version of faith where violence is sacred and loyalty is everything.
It's pretty disturbing. And they even twist religious symbols, like the Virgin Mary or Michael the Archangel, using them in their initiation rituals.
Almost like a mockery of traditional religion.
Exactly. And they use it to intimidate, to control, to create a sense of awe and fear.
It's psychological manipulation at its finest.
The source also compares mafia families to nomadic Romani.
Interesting. What's the connection there?
Well, they both rely heavily on traditions, family-based organization.
Okay, so they have these deep cultural roots that contribute to their resilience.
Right. And within the 'Ndrangheta, there's this even more secretive group called La Santa.
The name itself sounds religious, doesn't it?
It does. and it hints at the power and authority the mafia wants to project.
Like they're untouchable, almost divine.
And there's this historical figure, Joseph Balsamo, who might hold some clues about the origins of the mafia's religious practices.
Balsamo, wasn't he some sort of...
He was this fascinating character, really. He seemed to embody both the spirit of the mafia and Freemasonry. It's like he was this bridge between these two worlds.
Yeah, that's a connection most people wouldn't even think of.
Right. It's like uncovering a secret history. But to really understand the mafia's hold on power, we need to talk about how they raise their children.
Ah, yes, the next generation of mafiosi.
The source material goes deep into the psychology of their upbringing. And one of the key things they talk about is this concept of double link.
Double link. That sounds familiar. Refresh my memory.
It's basically a psychological tactic where you give a child conflicting messages.
Conflicting messages? Like how?
Like the source gives this example of a mother offering her child a glass of water and then snatching it away.
So it's about confusing the child, making them doubt their own perception.
Exactly. It's not just about physical abuse or threats. It's about messing with the kid's mind from a very young age.
Wow. That's cold.
And the thing is, when you combine this double link manipulation with exposure to violence and cruelty, you create individuals with completely warped worldviews.
And a deep, deep dependence on the mafia family structure.
Because that's the only reality they know. They have no other frame of reference.
It's heartbreaking, really. They never had a chance.
And the source material points out that many mafia members display signs of like schizophrenia or narcissistic personality disorder.
It's like the system is designed to break them psychologically.
And it's incredibly effective. They create this vicious cycle that ensures the loyalty of future generations. It's terrifying.
Absolutely chilling. It's like a trap that's almost impossible to escape.
And that brings us to the plight of those born into mafia families, those who never had a choice.
They're essentially prisoners of their own bloodlines.
Trapped in a system that offers no real freedom, no real hope. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
We've been having a pretty intense conversation, haven't we? Really diving deep into the dark side of the mafia.
We've seen how their influence extends far beyond those typical images of organized crime.
It's about power and control, about manipulating systems and exploiting weaknesses.
And we're seeing it through the lens of this really insightful source material, The Tree of Evil.
Yeah, it's a pretty sobering read. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how the mafia operates.
It's not always about brute force or overt
It's
violence.
more insidious than that.
Exactly. They prey on people's vulnerabilities, their fears.
And they twist those things to their own advantage.
It's a really disturbing picture. So where do we even begin to fight something so deeply rooted and complex?
Well, the Tree of Evil actually offers some pretty intriguing strategies, even if they're challenging to implement.
Like what?
Well, first of all, it stresses the importance of working smart, not just hard.
Meaning?
The authors emphasize the need for anonymity and strategic action.
Because direct confrontation is...
It's incredibly dangerous. You're literally putting your life at risk if you go head-to-head with the mafia.
So it's about being as cunning and adaptable as the mafia itself.
Exactly. You have to play the long game.
And one of their most intriguing ideas is this concept of a will for better living.
Oh, yeah. That one really stood out to me. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. Imagine a legal framework that allows individuals to formally sever ties with their families.
Wow. That's a radical idea.
It is. It's essentially erasing their old identity.
But for someone trapped in the mafia's web, it could be a lifeline, right?
Yeah.
A way to escape the cycle of violence and control.
Exactly. It would require a fundamental shift in how we view family obligations and individual rights.
Yeah, I can see how that would be controversial.
But the authors argue that it's necessary to protect those seeking to break free.
It makes sense. You can't expect someone to turn their back on the only world they've ever known without some kind of safety net.
Absolutely. The source also emphasizes the need to address the psychological wounds inflicted by the mafia.
Oh, right. The deep trauma that comes from a lifetime of manipulation and abuse.
And the source actually suggests widespread psychological treatment to help these individuals heal.
So it's about deprogramming them from the cult-like mentality of the mafia.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because it's not just about individual healing. It's about healing society as a whole.
So you create a more just and equitable society.
A society where those mafia tactics don't work anymore?
Because there's no longer that fertile ground of fear and vulnerability for them to exploit.
Exactly. Empower people, give them opportunities, and the mafia's grip starts to weaken.
And the source really pushes for empowering younger generations, right?
Especially. Give them the education, the resources, the opportunities to build a future free from the mafia's influence.
So they can break that cycle of poverty, ignorance, and dependence that fuels organized crime.
Right. But the source also warns against naive idealism.
Oh yeah, how so?
It reminds us that the enemy is often hidden.
Lurking in plain sight.
Within institutions and communities we might think are safe.
So we can't be complacent.
We have to be vigilant, question our assumptions, and be wary of anyone claiming to have all the answers.
It's like developing a healthy skepticism towards power structures.
Exactly. Because even those in positions of authority can be compromised. The mafia is very good at infiltrating systems.
And the source also suggests some pretty concrete legal reforms.
Like what?
Well, for one, they advocate for a system that allows for anonymous reporting of mafia crimes.
Makes sense. I mean, fear is one of their most powerful weapons, right?
Exactly. Witnesses are often terrified to come forward because they know the mafia will retaliate.
Not only against them, but against their families as well.
So this anonymous reporting system would give people a way to speak out without risking their lives.
It could be a real game changer.
And the source also calls for changes in how the justice system handles mafia cases.
Right, because the mafia is notorious for exploiting legal loopholes and bureaucratic delays.
They're masters at manipulating the system to their advantage.
So we need a legal system that's as relentless and adaptable as the mafia itself.
Exactly. The source advocates for a more proactive approach to investigations.
Not just reacting to crimes, but actively disrupting the mafia's networks and finances.
Anticipating their moves, identifying emerging threats, and deploying resources strategically to stop them from expanding.
It's about staying one step ahead of them.
Because, as we've seen, the mafia is constantly evolving, finding new ways to exploit our weaknesses.
It's a constant battle.
And a battle we can't afford to lose. Welcome back. It's been quite a journey, right? We've gone deep, deep into the world of the mafia.
Yeah, it's been an eye-opening experience. Really makes you think.
We started by trying to define what the mafia actually is.
And realized it's not as straightforward as you might think.
It's not just about guys in pinstripe suits. It's a system, a culture.
A way of thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the source material, the Tree of Evil, really pushes us to see the mafia as a global phenomenon.
Not just an Italian problem.
Right. It's a cancer that can spread anywhere.
Anywhere where there's vulnerability, corruption.
And a lack of accountability.
One of the most unsettling things for me was this whole idea of the mafia as a religion.
Yeah, that was a real curveball.
I mean, I can see how their rituals and traditions create this kind of warped belief system.
They demand absolute loyalty.
And they use violence and fear to control people.
It's like a cult, almost.
Exactly. And the source material talks about how they manipulate people psychologically right from childhood.
Oh, the double link stuff.
Yeah, that was messed up.
Giving kids these conflicting messages, making them doubt their own perceptions.
It's like psychological torture.
And it creates this deep dependency on the mafia family structure.
Because that's the only stability they know.
And anyone who tries to break free, to speak out.
They face incredible danger.
The mafia's reach is so vast, they can ruin your life, your family's lives.
They control businesses, they infiltrate institutions.
It's like they're everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
So how do we fight something like that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't
The
it?
Tree of Evil offers some suggestions, but it's not easy.
It's going to be a long, hard fight.
And we have to be smart about it.
Strategic.
We can't just go in guns blazing.
That's exactly what they want.
They thrive on violence and chaos.
So we have to find other ways to dismantle their power.
Legal reforms, psychological treatment for victims.
Empowering younger generations to resist their influence.
It's a multi-pronged approach.
And it's going to take time.
Patience, persistence.
And courage. Because standing up to the mafia is incredibly dangerous.
But it's a fight worth having.
If we want to create a just and equitable
A
world.
world where the mafia's influence has no place.
This deep dive has been a real wake-up call. It's made me realize just how pervasive the mafia's influence really is.
It's a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent.
We have to be vigilant. We have to question authority.
We have to be willing to speak out against injustice, even when it's scary.
Because silence only benefits the oppressors.
So what can we do? How can we make a difference?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Educate ourselves about the mafia's tactics.
Recognize their influence in our communities.
Support organizations that are fighting them.
And most importantly, never be afraid to speak out.
Even if your voice shakes.
Because that's how we break the cycle of fear.
And start to build a better world.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, the fight against the mafia is a fight for the soul of society. It's a fight that belongs to all of us.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.